let's get on to the really demoralizing fact that everything you love has been turned queer now. And that's not my words, by the way. That's the words of a group of TV, film, and comic book executives who sat for a chat with the Writers Guild of America, West, about how they're queer-washing all of your favorite characters and about how your concerns as fans don't matter. They don't need your money, apparently, because it's profitable on its own. Even though they need your money for it to be profitable, I'm sure we'll unpack it all. If there's any doubt on my love for this material, you can go over to our website, pay a $5 a month. There's also some preview clips on our YouTube to tantalize you. You can watch a series called Comics Corner, where Harry and I go through some of the best and worst that American and eventually maybe some manga has to offer. This one was on the history of the comics industry in the 1990s, where they had really outlandish and extreme comics, and they overprinted variant comics and caused a market crash. And it's looked back on as a time of hackery and gimmicks and being creatively bereft. And God, I wouldn't give anything to go back there now, because things are awful. As you've already seen with Pregnant Joker.
Yeah.
I am miserable. Now, bear in mind, the 1990s when Batman and Robin came out as well. So the movies were actually still somehow slightly better than the tripe we're getting at the moment with Wakanda Forever. So if you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of the Zoom call, it's up on YouTube, and it hasn't been taken too kindly, as we can see with the dislike bar. The 12 likes, 379 dislikes. The comments are a little
Oh, it must be
hostile.
popular. They must be popular. People seem to want them.
Yeah, but they're right. They certainly are a minority. People have basically said this is a seminar on how to lose your job. And unfortunately, that's not true, because they're going to stay there no matter what. Mainly because of ESG scores, but because of the ideological insistence on perverting everything you enjoyed in your childhood and in your adulthood. Bear in mind, folks like me, I paid throughout my life to buy back issues of the comics. I didn't buy these clowns, so that the company could make enough money so that they could come in and inherit the characters that me and other fans have made successful and other creators have made really good, and then pervert it and get paid doing so and call us racist for not liking it. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to subject you to a struggle session of a few clips. Now this panel involves a few people. I'll just run down. So it's Magdalene Visaggio, who's a trans Democratic Socialist of America and GLAAD member who writes for Marvel, DC, and Boom Studios. The head of TV at DC Entertainment, Kim Roberto, who says some very revelatory things during the course of this. James Tynion IV, who is the recent writer of Batman Eternal, Detective Comics, Batman and Robin Eternal, and the mainline Batman title until he went off to do his own thing. So he's no small creator, right? Thomas Page Maccabee, the showrunner on Umbrella Academy, which I don't know if you've seen it by any chance. They had Ellen Page, formerly a lesbian woman, become Elliot Page in their personal life, a trans man. And they were playing Vanya, who was a lesbian character in season 1 and 2. And then 12 days before the script hit the tables and they had to start filming, they had to change the character to make sure they showcased his trans journey to Victor.
It doesn't seem like the kind of thing that I would enjoy watching.
You would think that, but then you're a transphobe. So it's not made for you, Stelios. It's made for them to represent themselves. It's made for normal people. How dare you? How could you? Roberto Aguirre Sacasa is the chief creative officer at Archie Comics and the showrunner on Riverdale. And then David Siguari, executive vice president, film and television at Aftershock Media, formerly of the Trevor Project, who have done all sorts of sordid research. By the way, Sacasa, he spent his pre-comics career writing plays about Satanism, and he revised The Tempest to make Caliban the hero. So typical subversive stuff. So we're going to watch a few clips, and the first one I wanted to focus on is really, what is the teleology of art and representation? Because we hear representation a lot. What are you actually representing about a character? Especially if a character passes hands, like a Shakespeare play, or like American comic books, which is the secular monomyth of America. It survived the Second World War, the Cold War, and it reflects how Americans think of themselves. What actually is the essence of artistic representation? So I think we'll listen to Kim articulate this, and we'll see if we agree with her, shall we?
Who wants to answer? If you are reimagining a straight cis comic book character into a queer trans character, how do you navigate the balance of being true to the IP while also making the LGBTQ identity a genuine aspect of the character?
We always look at core immutables. I don't know if that's one of your favorite phrases, David, working in comics, but for us over at DC, core immutables mean like what makes the character tick, what makes them who they are. And we've never felt that it had to do with what they necessarily look like. It has to do with their emotions and what they're going through, their journey, their struggle.
So it's nothing to do with their physical form. It's nothing necessarily to do with their name. It's all to do with how they feel inside.
Which is supposed to be a core immutable.
Yeah. So their emotions are the only thing authentic to them. It's nothing to do with their externalities. It's nothing to do with how they represent in the world, which seems to undermine the representation argument, because if something physical matters, you need to see it to be it, then that would be a core immutable of the character. But it's only for identity that they like, of course. But then you come back to the sort of Gnostic mystic argument that the trans activists had of, I have the soul of a woman imprisoned in a man's body, and therefore it is actually a good and noble thing to upend the culture, like comics, or upend material reality and biological reality itself as a revolutionary enemy in order to liberate my authentic soul. So it sounds very much like, and we've spoken about this on air, not the Aristotelian conception of art, with physical realities abstracted one thing away from reality, so you can recognize it, but it's a testing ground for ideas, so they die so we don't have to, right? And you get the catharsis of tragedy, the levity and replicability of comedy, and the factualness of historical epics. Nothing to do with that. It's the world of forms. It's, you were a woman in the world of forms. That's your lived reality. That's your soul. You've been imprisoned in this material form, and then art is abstracted a form away from the form, so it's an extra imposition on you. It's unjust. So if we liberate you in art, you can understand how to liberate yourself in the real world and achieve the form of woman, even though you were born as a man. I
think this is completely messed up.
Right.
Yeah, and it doesn't see. I don't know if we're over analyzing it.
I think it's worthwhile to unpack the actual ideas behind what they're saying, because when you take it to its logical conclusion, it doesn't make sense. And so the contradictions exposed, this is just a naked power grab, which they do admit later on.
Yeah. So, okay. So if that is what they're trying to do, they're completely misguided, because, for instance, for Plato, the soul is genderless. So it doesn't help them if they're going to appeal to the gender of the soul. So, but yes, I think the idea is what you said about the authentic self. They think that there is a distinction between the authentic self and the perceived self. And the worst thing is that they are trying to present themselves as moral authorities over what is the authentic self supposed to be about. So what they're trying to do, I think they're trying to do it when it comes to schooling, and tell me if you think that this is a wild guess that is inapplicable here. They're trying to pose, to say that I know what you really are, your parents don't know, you may not know, and I'm going to create the whole system of education and possibly art, of artistic representation, as being a kind of message that I'm giving to you about who you are.
That makes perfect sense as well, because lots of these people started out in young adult fiction, like Beast Boy Loves Raven, or I Am Not Starfire, or Gotham Academy, or what's the other one? I can't remember. It's one about Aqualad being gay. And that is how they get into comics, and they take over the lead titles and subvert them with an effort called 5G, where suddenly there's non-binary Flash, bisexual Brazilian Wonder Woman, eventually bisexual Superman, non-binary female Aquagirl, and it's just Black Batman. Nobody's buying this stuff, but it is reinforcing the narrative.
Yeah.
And a lot of the time they're subsidized by scholastic book fairs. That's something that Marvel did. They had this thing called Devil Dinosaur and Moon Girl, and nobody bought it, but they did sell it to the libraries that go around to the schools and give out books and make sure they're sold in there. So they are pushing it in educational institutions.
Exactly. It is a top-down, a forced top-down message. And it's not coincidental that they are using comic characters like the Joker, or Batman and Superman. I think last time I checked, Helen Page wants to star as Superman.
Elliot Page, we have to say, we can't dead name. They may be starring as John Kent, who is a young bisexual Superman who takes over from his father, who is being turned into a fascist slowly, which is really miserable. And they may not confirm or deny that this is actually happening in this Zoom call. Oh dear. Right, so we've exposed it as a naked power grab because of its contradictions, and then they just come out and say that. So we've got a couple of clips here. So let's go through first how the cycle of media indoctrination works from the mouths of the creatives. Let's play.
On the Outfest side, as the largest LGBTQIA film festival, one of the programmers the other day was talking to us about the cycle of trans and queer narratives and how first they need to be tragic. So again, we can have empathy with the larger public, and we have our HIV stories and all these things that have already happened. And then they turn into comedy and sort of that best friend character or what have you, and their supporting character, the main character. And then we go into the normalization that Mags was talking about. And I think what we need to see is in that period, we get so many coming out stories. I think every coming out story, right, has probably been told, or we've seen different angles on it. What we need is actually fully realized, lived in trans and queer characters, that their sexuality, that their gender identity is not their only character trait, but that they have a dimensional realized life, and they live in a life in which they have family members and friends and lovers, and they're messy and they're tragic and they're weird. And I think we need to see that in space. We need to see that in the Wild West. We need to see that in our time. Like, I think we just need more of celebrating queerness and transness in a way that has not been done, because we've been relegated to like needing to speak on the parts that make it relatable to other people. And at this point, we don't need to be relatable anymore. We can just exist.
So there's a few things about that. So first of all, we get the genealogy of how, let's say in the 90s, for example, loads of sitcoms like Friends and Will and Grace had lots of gay characters, and they were the likable ones, they were the funny ones, they had some tragic dimensions, so you could really sympathize because they were just like you, right? The crux of Ellen DeGeneres' coming out piece in Time to make her seem really relatable. Then we see it move into, we need to capture existing properties and then retroactively insert throughout history all of our characters to make it seem normal. This is why I think Marie Antoinette now is having this new series on BBC where she's a lesbian, and same with that The Favourite about the Queens in the Georgian period, about them getting it on and all this painful nonsense where the root of it is just their sexuality. It's not a compelling story necessarily. So then that achieves total capture and dominance. And it's openly manipulative because they want to confect sympathy on the part of an aggrieved group. That's the starting point. And it's sad because it like retroactively colors stories like Life is Strange, which I really like. They try and co-opt that, even though it's a really good story, into their project of making you feel bad for this group. But then when it becomes normalized, then when they say, oh, what everyone actually would say if it was a gay character, for example, if you created a new gay character, let's just have them have a family and a central conflict and be a complete human, right? What they're saying is not just have them in the story and be a complete character where it's not just about their sexuality. Have the majority of characters, as James Tinian says later in here, he says, I want there to be not just a trans villain, but a trans hero also battling the trans villain. So it becomes ubiquitous and completely captured, and it becomes the norm. And so by doing that, rather than supplanting sympathy for their condition, you've now turned it into, we're going to start from the premise they have to be queer, trans, gay, etc. So that is actually the heroic virtue, rather than their actions, that undergird their heroism. But definitely not their villainy, because the villains we have to sympathise with, right? Joker was just cursed to be pregnant. Oh, what a sad fate befalling him. I identify more with the villains, which is actually something that the women of Marvel said in a podcast, which is explaining a lot, really. So if we move on to the next clip...
can I have a comment about representation that you said?
Yeah, go for it, please.
It's interesting that they're trying to overpopulate characters, overpopulate the characters of a comic with, LGBTQ plus characters. And they phrase it in terms of representation. But they're not... but members of this community are not the majority of the members of the population.
Yeah, it's not proportionate, yes.
It's not proportionate. So how are they going to... They're not representing, they are over-representing.
They're manufacturing, which is the creation of...
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the creation of the perception of consent on behalf of an aggrieved group, which means that if they confect this, they can push for more political power and the eternal provision of jobs in these captured institutions so they can keep confecting propaganda endlessly.
And I have another question.
Yep.
Why don't they make a new comic with new characters that are whatever they want them to be?
Because they don't sell. Nobody cares.
Yeah.
And actually what happened was as well, once there was a Batgirl of Burnside comic and they made an allusion to it being a trans villain, and in the comic Batgirl tries to say, no, but you can't sign up to the women's talent show because you're not, and the sound cuts are off, implying that it's a man. And because of transphobia, they had to rescind and reprint the comic and imply that, oh, you can't enter the talent show, you're just a bad singer. And then it turns out that there were some sexual assault allegations against the writer.
But do you think that this will sell comparatively to other Batman novels?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It tanks.
So there's a really big question here, and everyone in the economy should ask
Yes.
this. If businesses are run this way by people who are completely uncaring about what the majority of the people want and think, and they are just trying to push an agenda,
Yep.
they will go broke.
Yep.
Maybe, Marvel and DC are, too big to fail.
No, they're tanking entirely at the moment. DC is basically borderline cutting their publishing
Okay.
line. They've
Yeah.
been bought a bunch of times, but they are in ESGs, so they are going to get the subsidies to keep pushing these narratives because your corporate credit score will go up if you keep putting the trans superheroes in, comrade. So the next clip is Thomas Page McBee on how to sustain this long march for the institutions. How can you keep the pressure up? Let's play.
As a staff writer, you have very little power, right? So pick your battles and be really strategic and thoughtful about how you want to deal with that. But just really try to pick your battles, because what you really need is mental health and the capacity to have a longevity in this industry and to kind of keep a sustained interest in what it sounds like you have, which is like a genuine desire to disrupt this model that is systemically broken, where the staff writer who represents the marginalized group is the person with least amount of power. And then you're trying to convince people who are telling your stories or stories that relate to you that how to do that, and they're not listening. That is a problem in so many different ways right now in rooms. And I think it's the way that you can really, or the way we can all kind of get screwed by that, is if we exhaust all our emotional energy trying to save someone else's story from their own, from their own failure of understanding and empathy. And so I think letting people fail is okay. I think saying your piece and having your own integrity and picking your battles, but really just trying to think about, how do I sustain my own career and how do I make sure that I resolve this issue going forward as I get higher and higher up. And as you get higher and higher up, you will have more and more of a say. So there is like a light at the end of the tunnel. But I know that's not like the sexiest advice, but it's really, for me, that's been my experience. Like you pick your battles and just don't exhaust yourself over other people's inability to listen to you.
So he is openly admitting there that he will allow institutions and stories to fail as long as it advances his personal career, which is ideologically founded in, and as he said, emotions as his resource, expressing the authentic emotions of the character, which is their internal soul. So you are engaging in queer liberation theology in using the culture to strip people of their prejudices, I suppose they would say, that prevent them from being queer or trans or well, I suppose you meant to be
from
born
being
this
their
way,
true
but there you go.
self.
Exactly, yeah. And you don't want to exhaust your emotions. And so, like a group of ideological locusts, you will move from one cultural crop field to the next, deserting it of its money and seeing if it can just benefit you and your project. Why would you want to hire these people?
And as they said in the previous video, and then it will just be.
Yeah. Then you reach the end of history.
Let me just ask you, did you watch the whole of this video?
I did, yeah. I subjected
I'm
myself to 42
sincerely
hours of
worried
it.
about your mental health.
Thanks, mate. That's why I was so miserable yesterday. Yeah, it was horrendous to sit through. Hence why I had a stiff drink after work. So, as you can see, the very excited man on the right is James Tynion. He's the Batman writer, right? Ever since Robin has become gay, Jace Fox has taken over as Batman of New York, and he's become black, and it's written by the 12 Years a Slave writer. And James Tynion openly admits to setting these things up in his Batman run, and DC themselves were impeding him because they were worried about profitability. So DC actually does something right for once, dear God. They were just slow to getting there, right? To driving it off a cliff. But James Tynion has some very good insights in the dialectic of cultural transformation. It's very mask off. Let's listen, because I think he might be correct.
Comics in particular, like I remember just a few years ago, some of the things that are happening right now in like specifically DC Comics would never have happened. Absolutely not. I know because I was in the rooms where those ideas were shot down, like in extreme ways. And seeing the people actually able to step forward with them is like really, really something. And I am like, that's the biggest thing that I want moving forward, is just like, I want to make sure we keep the ground we've taken, like, because, we're going, like, knock on wood, we're all gonna be around this industry for a very long time. And the goal is, and that during that time, the culture is going to swing like a pendulum from like moments of like conservative moments and like very liberal moments. And we need, in the moments that the, you know, pendulum swings in a direction that is not in our favor, we need to make sure we hold on to the ground that we that we've taken. We need to make sure that we continue to support each other and make sure that we keep each other in this industry. And it's all about community. And that's one of the things that, frankly, the other side understands, is that like these, you know, the reason some of these groups, these fan groups, feel like they're so like all encompassing and all powerful and can dominate the conversation is they've built these little communities where they like share and support their own ideas, and then they go out and then they torment people online. And it's just like, we need to show that our community stands together as well in the face of that.
So it's the admission that they are indifferent to the success of the product, but they're going to co-opt your hobby in stewarding all of society along the long arc which bends towards their redefinition of social justice. And if you kick up a fuss about that and say, hey, look, I've paid for all these comics so you can actually get a job, they will dismiss you as a toxic fan that they don't need to write for.
And James Tynion IV,
Yes.
him, is actually playing the victimization card again. You know, the tide is against us.
Yeah, I would kill to write for Batman. You're very privileged, my friend.
And one interesting thing is to note is about the guy on the top left,
Yes.
Eric Anthony Glover.
Yes, he's the host and asking questions, yes.
Yeah, but when James Tynion IV was talking about being in rooms, executive committees where his, let's say,
Ideas were shot down.
ideas were shut down, the other guy does instantly this.
Yes.
So I think there's this performative behavior of sympathizing and empathizing with the other person's feelings.
Yeah, it's like when the phrase "the personal is political" came out of group therapy sessions by the feminists. This is an open therapy session of them all patting each other on the back and saying, yes, we're destroying companies, yes, we're trashing people's hobbies, but aren't we good people?
Yeah, but what you said, it's a therapy session. Now, if we combine this with the over-diagnosis coming
Yes.
from psychology, this is their dream of society.
Yeah.
This is what that's when they will achieve their goal of this is well we were going to just be.
Yeah, we're all atomized, but we're all constantly sobbing about our own plights and our own emotional incontinence. And the only thing we share is not common culture or ideals or aspirations, but superficial identity markers.
Yeah. The only thing that we share is our passivity.
So we're going to now look at the fact that the open admission by Kim Roberto that retconning characters is a political act. Let's listen.
As far as these iconic characters go, I think the more people speak up about the versions of the characters that they want to see, the more people listen at the top. I think it's a precarious, sometimes political game we have to play when it comes to certain characters. I mean, I think there's still a lot of battles. There are still a lot of battles to be fought. But as far as toxic masculinity in our industry and fandom is concerned specifically, I think what I've come to find is that there's usually a very large or very vocal but small group of people that are the toxic ones. And I think the majority of fans and the majority of people consuming this media, they're good people. And I don't think that, you know, they're as vocal. So I think if you are an ally, again, just like you kind of use your voice and support. I think that's all you can really do. But we try not to, at least I try not to listen to the toxic minority that is like on Twitter.
Oh, so now minorities are toxic. That's interesting. Thank you. So how did she get into the position that she's in? That's the important question. So she actually answers this with the next little bit we're gonna be subjected to, because they ask her, how do you convince straight people that run these companies, because obviously everything's systemically queerphobic and transphobic, to get green light and spend lots of money on these stories that don't seem to make any money? And she says, aha, that's where you're wrong. Diverse content is actually really profitable, guys. Let's roll the clip.
I have a fun thought on this. I mean, for me, I think it's tough because you sometimes will feel like, I mean, just as an obstacle in and of itself, identity, like sometimes you're in the room and you're not sure if you're the only queer person there. You're not sure if you have any allies. But for me, one of the things that I always love to do is cite my sources and bring evidence. So I love data. I love research. I mean, it all shows that diverse and inclusive content makes money. And I think to get a cishet person really invested, you sometimes have to go straight for the money and just show them that not only are these stories worth telling for obvious reasons that we are people and our lives and stories matter and are worth telling, but they're worth it in a financial sense. And I think that a lot of the times with these situations, you got to hit them in the pocketbook. You got to show them that it's a financially lucrative, smart endeavor.
So this all coming from the woman who oversaw the
That's
cancellation.
such a great point, especially when, again, we're seeing toxic fandom sort of on the rise with Little Mermaid, with Star Wars, with everything sort of coming out of it. And I think part of what we're all doing and we're trying to put out in the world is, as queer people or people of color that are telling stories about our experiences, those stories will matter to someone. That representation will matter. I keep thinking about the TikToks of the young Black girls that are watching, Haley be Little Mermaid, and that's a huge deal for them, and that'll matter even with the trolls sort of bombing everything. And so the more we can put our stories out there, and the more we can even center queer or trans narratives as the main focus point of our stories, instead of just a side character or a piece of a larger cishet narrative, I think that is important, even if sometimes they're not going to sell or they're not going to sort of be marketed the same way. I think just putting them out in the world is going to be meaningful in small ways that we might not even understand.
Yeah, we can end that one there, John, if it didn't cut off. Before I was so rudely interrupted by these people, Kim Roberto is the woman that oversaw the cancellation of Batgirl, Legends of Tomorrow, which were relentlessly, disproportionately having gay relationships in them. Again, not necessarily a fault for the characters, but it is a deliberate attempt to subvert on behalf of these people that just want ubiquitous queerness, as they would say, throughout every narrative, even when it isn't organic and it doesn't respect the original characters. So it's hilarious for her to say there, I have evidence that these narratives make money, even though she's overseen the complete demolition of DC's TV department. It's ridiculous.
She could just show the likes and dislikes of this video as an argument as to why it's popular.
She would have to download the YouTube extension for that because, of course, YouTube have hidden the dislike bar, haven't they? So what ends up happening is, and we can skip the next clip, John, just because we're so short on time, but she then is asked, where do you get these resources? And she says, glad. My team of researchers go out there and I give them a question to find the answer to. And she deliberately says, and oftentimes it's good for us because the data lines up with what we want it to happen anyway. Right, you're in a cult. You're just confirmation bias. You are taking your framework, projecting it on the world, and cutting off all the evidence which doesn't fit. You're going to activist organizations, never trust an activist to solve a problem, and then just going, this justifies the conclusion we already wanted. And that conclusion just so happens to be, I should get a job.
This is just an ideology. It's just a means of performatively showing that I'm one of the good guys.
Yeah.
I'm hip.
Yeah, and she later turns around and says, what we need actually is queer people, not just in the writing room, we need them in the boardroom, we need them making executive decisions, and we need cis-het people and allies to step aside and let us be the predominant voice in the room at this time because we know our lived experience. Right. So you're saying, I want to step over people and cut the queue, and the fans that have been in this queue forever, like myself, who would dream of inheriting these characters and writing authentic stories from them, who follow in the footsteps of Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson and Marv Wolfman and George Perez and all these brilliant people that stewarded these characters and made their own. No, I get to cut in line because I like women. I like women. I'm a woman. And so what I get is a job. I get a really high-paying job, and I get to destroy your hobby for my own profit. And if you didn't like it, well, you're just a transphobe. It's your fault. I guess you've got to sit there and watch what I make until you accept it, like Alex in Clockwork Orange with his eyes like, yeah.
The workplace has become very tyrannical.
Yes.
Because let's think of it this way. We have many people who are competing.
Yeah.
Competition doesn't mean necessarily an eye for an eye. It could be within particular standards.
Yeah.
So we have people here who are vastly unqualified to fill particular roles, and they cannot compete on equal terms.
Yes.
And they are playing the victim card afterwards, and they're libeling the people who are more capable than them.
Yes.
And that is how we end up with companies having people in a program that literally say it doesn't care what the buyers, it matters not what buyers want.
Yeah, it's a doctrine of entitlement and resentment. And if you have fabricated society as the cause for why you're put upon and deserve the advantages, then all those buyers that reject you are not people whose concerns you should listen to. They are affirmers of the hegemony which oppresses you, and so they can be dismissed. Profitability be damned, because we're on the right side of history. Doesn't matter. We need to make Batman as trans as possible until we finally get there. So I wanted to skip directly, John, if you would, just to clip 10, and then we'll finish with clip 10 and 11, just because we're so short on time. Clip 10 demonstrates the effects of exactly what these people want and how ridiculous the infinite regression of identities will be in retconning characters. Let's go.
We put all of our favorite, teen queer characters right at the forefront of that strategy. And I can't speak to the specific characters just yet, but there are some really exciting things coming down the pipeline. And, we do hear you. It's just hang in there a little bit longer and you'll see all the good stuff starting to trickle forth.
What is your dream cishet legacy comic book character you hope to see a queered up adaptation of?
My dream was realized. I was in the 90s. It was all about Superboy and Robin being queer. And that was what all the fanfics were about. Roberto knows what I'm talking about. Thomas, everybody's nodding. Yes, you guys were all part of the same live journal communities as me. I got my queer bisexual Superboy, and I got my queer bisexual Tim Drake Robin. I got them both in the same year, even.
I'm ready to see a polyamorous relationship between Cyclops, Wolverine, and Jean Grey, so that they can
I
all
please have that? Can they just be a throuple?
Yes, I want that so bad, and we all know it's there and it's subtext, and I just
totally
want to see
there.
it happen.
It's not there.
The comic I read growing up most religiously was Wolverine, because he seemed so trans in retrospect, and I just don't know why the world doesn't understand this, and I feel like it has to happen. So
Can we talk about how his OG height was 5'3"?
that's what I'm saying.
I'm here for this.
Oh, I was gonna say one, and this is for Kim. If you want to take this back to work, I've
Yes,
always
it is what
seen
you're thinking.
Poison Ivy as trans, and
Oh my God, that's genius.
that just needs to happen. But also, I really want a trans lesbian action adventure story on Themyscira. I was that's really
Just you wait. Just you
yeah.
wait.
oh okay great.
Just you wait. We'll talk.
The woman that's head of BCTV says, just you wait, about trans women going onto a all-female island, and that is expressed as a fantasy by the trans female writer. So the trans female writer wants access to an island of exclusively women, and then the woman says, oh, yeah, all of my childhood fantasies about Robin and Superboy having sex, which at the time in the 90s, they were young teenagers, has now happened. So we are suffering the pollution of our art by your sexual fantasies and fetishes. Thanks so much for that. And so then we get stuff like this. DC's Pride 2022. We're not going to go through the actual comic just for time. But nobody else read it. But it's just a collection of stories like where Batgirl's trans friend has a trans pride flag wrapped around a baseball bat and says, I'm a trans woman living in Gotham. Of course I have a weapon. And you wonder why nobody's buying American comics anymore. I haven't bought any of this stuff since 2018. I just buy back issues. So if we can go just onto the last one, because this march will be endless. We'll wrap up before the comments. They will never be happy. It's a cult. It's a cult of misery, and misery loves company. Because Magdalene Visaggio barely contributes for this entire thing and had to dip out halfway through. But they did say something very revelatory here. Let's play.
In the discussions around our characters, but yeah, moving beyond the fact that they're trans, I also, a huge thing, would love to see more than one trans person in a scene together. We have.
Tell me about it.
Is there like a Bechdel test version of this?
There needs to be.
It's basic. Yeah, it's basically does a trans person have friends who are also trans? And
Well, because I think the real question is, I know surprisingly few cis people at this point.
in real life, yeah.
I want to live in your world, Mags. That's the world I want to live in.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
Yes, I do.
No, you don't. No, you don't. It's a miserable little bubble.
Mask off moment. You live in a miserable little bubble because you don't know any normal people. You don't know any non-ideologues. So you are resentful and you want to pollute everything we love so you can feel better about yourselves. So my message to the companies that make my favourite art and everything I love, stop hiring these monsters, get off ESG scores and make some bloody good comics for once. Until then, I'll just keep buying back issues.
I endorse this message, I must say.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the book clubs we do, this one on Gad Sad's The Parasitic Mind. If you'd like to find out what else we're putting out, you can follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.